Hi guys, now that you completed your shading worksheet, which is right here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start shading our still life. If you look here, I've already started shading in the vase for the flowers. For this part of the project, I'm going to go ahead and shade in these two jars right here. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to zoom you guys right in so you can see what I'm doing step by step. I have a picture there for reference, so you should be looking at your picture while you're doing it. I also have my value scale that I just completed as reference as well, and I'm looking at that while I am shading, and we're using that blending method. So I have my value scale here. I'm just going to leave these things up to the side so I have them for reference. I'm going to put my picture over it. I just want to arrange it so I can see all of these things while I'm working. The picture is going to cut off a little bit, but we are focusing, like I said, on these two jars right here. And I'm going to really zoom myself in to those just so we can see them. Okay, that is a lot better. So you guys have a nice view now of those two jars. So we know that we have different values. So we have our value scale. We know that we have lights and darks, and we want to add those things into our drawing. Now, when many people think shading is just coloring in, it's not. It's about adding those lights and darks to making your objects look realistic. If I'm looking at my jar here, it does have highlights. So I'm going to go in really lightly with my pencil, and I'm going to start outlining where I want those highlights to be. Those highlights are going to be my lighter marks. That's what helps glass look like glass. In this glass, there's a nice big highlight here, and there's one also down here, and there's one over here. And otherwise, that blue jar is a darker value. The jar also has these beads sitting through it. So I do want to make sure that they're in there as well. Just make sure you have a pencil with a good eraser, or your eraser and your blender. So the three things you need are your regular pencil, your eraser, and your blender. So I'm going to go ahead and start by shading this clear one in. I want to keep it a lighter value. So I'm going to go really lightly with my pencil, and I have these contour lines. So I'm going to just go off of those, and really, really lightly, I'm going to give this all one nice value. The goal is to have each piece have different values. So you don't want to, once I shade this in, I'm going to have to go back and add darks and lights. And I'm going to give it one nice even value. I'm going to smudge with my fingers just because it's not really a lot. But if you want to use your blender, go ahead. Okay, so then where I have these highlights, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go a little bit darker. If I'm going by the value scale, I'm going to put these at like a 2, 3 value. You can think of it numbers like that, but you don't necessarily have to. I'm just going to outline all the highlights a little darker. And remember, the friction of the pencil is what makes the lead transfer to the paper. So if I were to let this sit for like a few hours, it might be a little harder to blend, especially in the building that's cold. So I'm just going to make sure that right after I put my values in, I'm going ahead and I'm blending. And you can blend right over what you have outlined, because you can go in with your pencil. What I'm going to do right now is really beef up those highlights. Shading takes time. It takes a lot of practice. So this first one, we're just doing our best. I'm going to start adding a couple more values into the glass. I'm going up and down because I want the viewer to know that this is a piece of glass. The beads, I'm going to start giving those like a 3 value because they are floating kind of. And one of them has like a really big glare. I'm going to draw some straight up and down lines over them. And I'm going to blend those up and down. That gives the illusion that they're sitting in the glass. So I fill them in, and then I shade up and down right over them. I'm going to just go in with this eraser just because it's brand new, and it's going to give me a nice bright highlight. So it's a lot of adding and taking away. I'm going to add a couple more highlights in there just to make it look a little more realistic. So anytime I decide to put a highlight in, I need to go around it with my pencil, and I need to make sure I have a nice gradient. So it can't just be bright white. Some things will be, it will happen that it is bright white, but you want to have a nice value, a nice blend. You don't want things to be too stark. I'm gonna clean up around it too. I'm not gonna shade this cloth really dark. I'm just gonna leave it and worry about shading the objects. I just want to make sure that we can see. Cool. All right. We're getting somewhere. Now, we don't want all those harsh lines, so I'm going to just keep going back with the blender and really blur them out. Glass is very, very hard to shade, so it takes a little more than 5 minutes and just put color on it. It takes a little bit of love. Just use my eraser to blur out. Kind of want it that blurry feel, not too stark. I'm gonna give the inside a little bit of a darker value. A little highlight around the front. Once again, you're using your picture as reference to help you where you should be putting these lights and darks. Especially with the glass part of it, my picture is showing me exactly where my highlights are. Just so you guys have reference. My highlights are the following. So that's a highlight. The top here is a highlight. So if I look at my picture and I don't see those things, I need to make sure that I go back and put them in. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna shade this blue jar. I'm gonna run out of a little bit of time, but I'm going to shade the blue jar. Can't zoom you in anymore. That's as far as I go. All right, so the blue jar is a darker value. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna put that value in using the lines that I drew. I'm gonna go off of those. I do have some really bright standing out highlights. So I'm gonna color kind of, or shade, really shade. We're not using the word color. I'm going to shade around them because we're not coloring. We're using black and white. A lot of our drawings are using black and white. We don't really get into color pencil until you're in intermediate. Just have to be careful. Sometimes there's lines in the paper. So I have a nice value. I'm going to go ahead, use your blender. I'm going to go ahead and probably just use my finger. Goes a little faster. And I'm going to use my blender for the bottom. All right, going back in, just really erasing out my highlights. This bottle does have really distinct highlights, so this one up here is a lot smaller, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fill it back in and give it the shape that I need it to have. Really, really thin. Okay, and I would do the same for the books. They're a darker value. I would draw in all my details. And I would start going there. Same with the pumpkin. You have to make sure that you hit those gradient values and you have them as well. I'm going to include another shading video that I found online that will help you guys too, aside from this one, in case you're confused on how to really shade. I'm going to go find a few for you to get you guys to kind of, you know, have something else to learn from. But this is shading your still life for my remotes. Just keep in mind that you have your value scale, you have your photo you're working off of. Those are things that you should be using as a guide. Like I said, you need a pencil, eraser, and blender. Okay? Happy shading!